December 2001, the end of another year, and I have a wide range of books to talk about this time. Last video, it was all except for one book, it was all a bunch of media tie-in stuff. There was a 4-book series and a trilogy, and then the first in another trilogy. And December started out with books 2 and 3 in that last trilogy, but then things get crazy. Let's jump right in. The first and second books that I read in December of 2001 were Battletech Warrior, Repost. Is that how you pronounce that? By Michael A. Stackpole, and Battletech Warrior Coup, or Coupe, by Michael A. Stackpole. It's all like fencing or sword fighting terms. The first book was On Guard. So, books 2 and 3 of the Battletech Warrior trilogy by Michael A. Stackpole. And these books, it's a lot of mechs fighting. It's a lot of political intrigue. Two of the houses, I believe they are. Basically, it's way in the future. There's a galaxy with all these conflicting houses, and so two of them have joined forces through marriage, but someone else has hired spies to undermine all that. And meanwhile, this, like, the greatest mech warrior of all has returned to wreak havoc, and just mech battles and politics. In the third one, the third book, it all just, of course, it's all going to come to a head. So these books are, like I keep saying, a lot of politics. So I haven't read Dune. I believe there's a lot of politics in that. So it makes me think it's similar to that. Not the boring, like, Star Wars prequel politics. But the mech battles are what I'm there for. They're just, giant robots piloted by people going at each other, and worrying about overheating. That's like one of the things that I always remember. I think in the video game that I played, the Battletech video game, you had to worry about overheating. You couldn't just, like, hold the trigger down and let your weapons fire. You had a heat gauge, and if it got to the end, your mech would shut down until it cooled down enough and leaves you vulnerable. I think in the card game it had the same thing. So there's a lot of that as you're reading these mech battles, and the mechs are maneuvering and they're firing their weapons, and they're also worrying about heat. But I like these. So Battletech, Repost, and Coupe. Again, not sure if that's how you say it. There's a little accent on the end there, by Michael A. Stackpole. Now, we're going to get into some stuff. So the third book I read in December of 2001 is called Congregations in Conflict, The Battle Over Homosexuality, by Keith Hartman. This is a nonfiction book, and it takes a look at basically religion and homosexuality through a number of different cases or incidents, whatever you want to call them, and they involve, I had to write all this down, so all sorts of different types of churches or religions or whatever. So there's a Methodist church, there's a group of Quakers, there's a Southern Baptist church, there are some monks. I looked at in the description, it didn't say specifically what kind of monks, and there's an Episcopal church. So the book basically looks at these real world things that happened in these different churches and how they dealt with the issue of homosexuality. And I thought it was fascinating. And to see, some people might say, well, like Methodists and Baptists, Episcopals, they're all the same. Well, they're dealing with things in different ways. They're not all the same. Quakers and monks, obviously, sort of don't fit in with the others. But they are all different, and they all handle these issues in different ways. And a fascinating book. Very, very interesting. So that's Congregations in Conflict, The Battle Over Homosexuality by Keith Hartman. And then from there, I went to a book, another nonfiction book. The reason I picked this up and read it is because um, Hank McCoy, the Beast, was reading it in a comic book that I read. And I looked it up, and it was a real thing. It sounded fascinating. Phantoms in the Brain by V.S. Ramachandran, MD, PhD, and Sandra Blakesley. Phantoms in the Brain. This is a book about neurological disorders, neurological issues, and it was fascinating dealing with people who have had strokes or people that just have weird I hate to say weird, but they're bizarre. That's might even be worse than weird. Neurological issues. There's like a woman that would see. It says cartoon characters in her blind spot, but then it explained like she wasn't seeing Bugs Bunny or anything like that. She was seeing cartoon versions of people. And I believe this is the book that had a little thing to show everybody has a blind spot. If I remember correctly, it's where the optic nerve connects to the eyeball, creates a blind spot. And it had this cool experiment where it had a circle on the page of the book. There was a circle with a line that came down to the top of the circle and then from the bottom of the circle, but nothing in the circle. And they're demonstrating how your brain fills in information that's not necessarily there. And so you would close one eye and hold the book out and move it closer to your eye. And you're seeing this circle with a line coming to the top of it, a line coming down from the bottom of it. And when it would hit your blind spot, the line would go through the circle. I did this, it happened, and basically it's your brain saying, you've hit that blind spot, and your brain says, well, obviously that line goes all the way through, and fills that information in. Fascinating to me. So that was cool. I can't remember if there were a couple other experiments, little things in there, but that blind spot thing was really cool. But then it talks about phantom limb, and if you've ever watched House, there's an episode where he's got this grumpy neighbor who lost a limb in a war, and he uses a mirror to help the guy because he says it always feels like the arm that he doesn't have, that it's just tight, it's cramped up. He feels like he's just making a fist as hard as he can, and House puts the arm that he does have in a box that has a mirror, so then it looks like he has two arms. He's looking at it, and he says, make a fist with your left arm, I'm going to say. Now relax it. And he's looking at the other image and sees his right arm relax. So there's that, and he feels it. So there's that kind of thing in there. This talked about stroke victims that forget that, again, I'm going to say the left side, they forget the left side, their left side, that left exists. And so they had a case of a guy that, after having a stroke, getting out of the hospital, returning home, like his first morning at home, came out of his bedroom and had only dressed half his body, had only shaved half his face. And then, when they put food in front of him, would literally just eat from the right half of his plate. If you put his drink on his left side, he wouldn't know that he had a drink. You'd have to put it on the right side. There was one experiment they did, kind of the same issue, where they would put a mirror in front of somebody, and they would hold a piece of candy over their right shoulder, behind them. They would hold a piece of candy over their right shoulder. They're looking at the mirror, and they'd be like, yeah, it's back here. They'd reach for it. And then they would hold it over their left shoulder, and they would reach forward to grab the candy. So just so many different cases, so many different, I don't remember how much they get into how they can fix these things, exact causes, because, strokes and things, but some things they don't have explanations for. Just a really, really fascinating book. Phantoms in the Brain. All right, then I followed that up with a book called The Gumshoe, the Witch, and the Virtual Corpse by Keith Hartman. I just realized that I have Congregations in Conflict by Keith Hartman. So, same guy? You know what? I should have noticed this, except that I don't look at the authors' names when I'm taking my notes, looking things up and taking my notes. I'm just looking at the titles. I look up the title. I'll have to check and see. You know what? Let's see. I don't think. Let's go with. Here we go. So we've got The Gumshoe, the Virtual Corpse. There's the author's name. I'm clicking on it. Yep, same guy. So I'm guessing that I read The Gumshoe, the Witch, and the Virtual Corpse after, well, obviously I read it after reading Congregations in Conflict, but that is what led me to this book. Anyway, so The Gumshoe, the Witch, and the Virtual Corpse is a science fiction mystery. It takes place in Atlanta in 2045. There is a serial killer staging bodies, all sorts of craziness with the crime scenes and everything, but a huge cast of characters that are trying to figure out what's going on. And I'm using the terminology that it has in the description of the book. So you have a gay detective, a black cop, a Wiccan journalist, a televangelist who wants to be president, a Christian rock star who's trying to stop the televangelist, and a transgender shaman. And all of these characters are essentially trying to solve this serial murder, but they all sort of have their own personal agendas as well. I really don't remember too much about my experience reading it. It sounds fascinating, but I may have to. Maybe I'll grab it on Kindle, but then I'll forget I have it because it really seems like something I should remember that I want to read again. But that's The Gumshoe, the Witch, and the Virtual Corpse by Keith Hartman. I followed that up with Columbo, the Glitter Murder by William Harrington. In this book, a famous movie director is murdered, and it seems like a robbery gone wrong. But of course, Columbo's not buying that. He's going to dig in and find out where it really happened. I'm a huge fan of Columbo. I enjoy these Columbo novels. They're not as good as watching the show, but they're pretty good. Next up, Dark Matter in Fluid Silence by G.W. Turpa. Part of this Dark Matter series, which is sort of an X-Files-esque series. An organization that investigates paranormal and weird stuff. Well, two of the investigators are searching for the missing third, or a missing third, and end up stumbling upon a mystery that goes back to Nazi Germany and some neo-Nazis that are, causing trouble of a paranormal manner. These are books that I wouldn't mind, again, picking up and reading again. I wouldn't mind adding them to my collection. Just fun stuff, especially if you're a fan of the X-Files. Then we have a book that I have, but it is buried. There are at least 3 piles of books in front of this. This is The Mystery of Dr. Fu Manchu by Sax Rohmer. It is the first Fu Manchu book. I started reading the Fu Manchu books because I'm a huge, 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 huge fan of Master of Kung Fu, Shang-Chi. And in the comics, the Marvel Comics, Shang-Chi, Master of Kung Fu, Fu Manchu is Shang-Chi's father. Very dated, as far as racial issues. It's very Yellow Peril. Although it always felt to me that it was just that Fu Manchu happened to be Chinese. He wasn't evil because he was Chinese. He just happened to be Chinese. But in the books, they do, like, the characters will say things about Yellow Peril. But basically, uh, Fu Manchu, Dr. Fu Manchu, is a Chinese gentleman, an evil supervillain, essentially. His nemeses are Sir Dennis Nayland Smith and Dr. Petrie. And this book, to me, it feels like interconnected short stories. I don't know if they were published that way, like in a periodical or something, because it doesn't. The first, at least the first part of it, the first half or so, doesn't really flow that smoothly. Each chapter seems to have a pretty, aside from like Fu Manchu not being captured or anything, each chapter feels like it has a definitive ending. Um, so it seems like all these little adventures that lead up to the greater plot of Nayland Smith and Petrie trying to stop Fu Manchu. They're not mysteries, they're thrillers, they're adventure stories. There's all sorts of crazy traps and mysterious assassins and um, exotic locales and exotic people, and they're very pulp, and I enjoy them. So it's the first one. I actually reread it, well, quite a few years ago, but I've read it more than once. The Mystery of Dr. Fu Manchu by Sax Rohmer. Then we have Wrong Things by Poppy Z. Bright and Caitlin R. Kiernan. This is a small book, and it has a novella by Bright, who is now Billy Martin, but I'm going with what's on the cover. So a novella by Poppy Z. Bright, a novella by Caitlin R. Kiernan, and then a collaborative novella written by the two of them. And it's got illustrations, like 10 illustrations in it. I'm a fan of Poppy Z. Bright, aka Billy Martin, and a fanish of Caitlin R. Kiernan. So, it was a good read. I really like Billy Martin's stuff. And I still question if I'm talking about a book that has Poppy Z. Bright on the cover, do I still use that name or do I say Billy Martin? I think Billy Martin has said, yeah, the books are by Poppy Z. Bright. But don't take my word for that. Anyway, Wrong Things by Poppy Z. Bright and Caitlin R. Kiernan. And then, of course, we have Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the script book, Season 2, Volume 2, which includes the episodes Lie to Me, The Dark Age, What's My Line Part 1, What's My Line Part 2, Ted, and Bad Eggs. Lie to Me, very good, very sad episode. The Dark Age gives us some history on Giles. What's My Line Parts 1 and 2 are kind of big because it introduces another Slayer. So this is because spoilers, because Buffy dies for a short time at the end of season 1, that essentially triggers a new Slayer. Because every time a Slayer dies, a new one is triggered. Buffy was brought back to life through CPR, but that doesn't like untrigger the Slayer. So now we learn that there could be, through crazy circumstances, 2 Slayers at the same time. And some other stuff goes down in those episodes that carry over into things. And then Ted is not the greatest episode, but it's got John Ritter giving a great performance as a psychopath. And then Bad Eggs, possibly the weakest episode in season 2. But anyway, it's the scripts for those episodes. So you're getting things that didn't necessarily make it to air. And some trivia, I believe. The penultimate book for December of 2001, The Keys of Hell by Jack Higgins. This is a Paul Chavas book. I don't know how to say the name. It's Chavasse. And this is a guy, he's a pilot that runs outside the law, moving things from here and there. But then the Albanian government wants to destroy this statue, the Madonna of Scutari, and it will have a negative effect on a lot of people. And Paul decides he's going to get involved and try to find the statue and stop the bad guys. It's a excuse me. It's a Jack Higgins thriller. Not one that stands out in my brain. And then finally, we have Ghost Town by Ed Gorman. This is another one of Ed Gorman's westerns. The main character is Bryce Lamont. He gets out of prison. He wants his share of the money that he and his partner stole. So he goes to Wyatt, Wisconsin, where his partners are. I think he's the only one that went to jail. Excuse me, getting dry throat from all this talking. But he's able to get his money, but then the bank gets robbed, and the love of his life gets murdered, and so he's going after the people that robbed the bank, but he's contracted malaria. So is he going to be able to get his revenge before malaria takes him down? Ed Gorman writes interesting characters, and he's a mystery writer, a thriller writer, a suspense writer, or a Western writer, and I enjoy pretty much whatever he did before he passed. But that's it. That is everything that I read in December of 2001, and I do think it's a wild mix of stuff. Science fiction media tie-in, and then some nonfiction and mysteries and sci-fi and horror and a Western and all sorts of craziness. And I think looking ahead at January, there's we got a lot of media tie-in stuff, but also a lot of other crazy things. So stay tuned. Question for this video. I did not think ahead. So how about, do you have any interest in reading something like Phantoms in the Brain? It is not technical in any way. It's not like reading a medical manual. It's reading, I feel, these fascinating case studies and real life things. Is that the type of thing that would interest you? Reading about neurological disorders, neurological issues. Do you feel that people are being exploited when their cases are being talked about in books like this? I don't remember if it says, names have been changed, or even if they use names. But is it something that interests you? Do you feel it is exploiting people in any way? I guess that's my questions. Obviously, I'm fascinated by this sort of thing. And I would assume either they're not using names, or they've gotten if they are using names, they have to have permission, right? So I don't think there's any exploitation going on. That's just my opinion. Let me know yours in the comments below. And if you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put those in the comments below. Comments are open for spoilers. Just post a spoiler warning. We try to be polite here on my channel. Please like, share, and subscribe, all the usual YouTube stuff. And if you care to follow me on other social media, my Twitter is @Ronan5757. My Instagram, where I post pictures of books, comic books, board games, and fuzzy animals, is Eric Smith5757. That's Eric with a K, ERIKSMITH 5757. If you're on Blue Sky, I am @EL Smith. That's all I have for you this time. So until next time, read more books.